The floorboard beneath my bare feet groaned like a wounded animal as I pressed myself against the closet door. Through the thin wood, I could hear my father's voice barely above a whisper, but somehow more terrifying than any scream. "She's getting too comfortable, Arthur, too bold. Did you see how she looked at me during dinner?" "I saw it, Dad. What do you want me to do?" I held my breath, my 8-year-old heart hammering so hard, I was certain they could hear it through the walls. The storage room was just below my hiding spot in the upstairs closet. Every word floated up through the old house's thin floors, like poison seeping through cracks. "Take her there tomorrow afternoon. Your mother has that church meeting. Make sure she understands that little girls who think they're smart need to be reminded of their place." My father's voice carried that particular tone, the one that sounded almost gentle to outsiders, but turned my blood to ice water. It was the same voice he used when greeting customers at his store, when shaking hands with the pastor, when anyone in Leesburg, Virginia might be watching. How hard this time? Hard enough that she stops thinking she can tell her mother things. Hard enough that she remembers who owns her. I didn't understand all the words then, but I understood the intention. Tomorrow would bring another visit to the storage room. Another afternoon of learning what my father called proper behavior for young ladies. As their footsteps moved away, I remained frozen in that closet for what felt like hours, surrounded by my mother's dresses that smelled of lavender and fear. Even at 8, I knew something was fundamentally wrong with our family. Other fathers didn't speak about their daughters like livestock. Other big brothers didn't smile the way Arthur smiled when I cried. But I also knew with the terrible certainty that comes to children who grow up in houses where love and violence wear the same face, that tomorrow I would pretend to be surprised when Arthur came for me. I would go quietly to that storage room because making noise only made everything worse. What I didn't know as I finally crept back to my bedroom that December night in 1963 was that my mother was lying awake in her own bed, staring at the ceiling and making plans that would change everything. From the outside, we were the Smiths of Main Street, respectable, church-going, prosperous. My father, Alfred, owned the town's most successful general store, a sprawling establishment that carried everything from farming tools to ladies' bonnets. He was a handsome man in his 40s, with silver threading through his dark hair and a smile that could charm the devil himself. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson. How's that arthritis treating you? I've got some liniment that might help." "Alfred Smith, you're too good to us simple folk. The Lord surely blessed this town when he sent you here." I watched these exchanges from behind the candy counter, where I sometimes helped after school, marveling at how easily my father transformed into this benevolent merchant. His voice would soften, his shoulders would relax, and for those moments, he became someone entirely different from the man who whispered instructions to Arthur in the dark. My mother Janet played her role perfectly, too. She was beautiful in that understated way that made people trust her instantly. Warm brown eyes, honey-colored hair, always pinned in a neat bun, and a soft voice that never rose above what was considered proper for a lady. She organized church socials, brought casseroles to sick neighbors, and maintained our home with meticulous care. "Janet Smith makes the best apple pie in 3 counties, the other church ladies would say. "Alfred's lucky to have such a devoted wife. If only they had seen how her hands shook when she made that pie. If only they had noticed how she flinched when my father touched her shoulder in public, or how quickly she looked away whenever someone complimented her appearance in his presence." Arthur, at 11, was already showing signs of the man he would become. Tall for his age, with our father's dark hair and an unsettling intensity in his green eyes, he excelled in school and charmed adults with his polite manners and quick wit. "That Arthur Smith is going places," his teacher, Miss Morrison, told my mother at a school meeting. "Such a bright boy, so well-mannered. You and Alfred should be proud." "We are," my mother replied, her smile never wavering. "He's always been special." The word special carried different meanings in our house. To the outside world, Arthur was special because he was intelligent and charming. To me, he was special in the way that poisonous snakes are special beautiful, fascinating, and deadly. I was the baby of the family, small for my age, with my mother's coloring and what people generously called an active imagination. I was always reading, always asking questions, always getting into places where I shouldn't be, like closets where I could overhear conversations meant for other ears. "Virginia's going to be a handful when she grows up," people would say to my parents. "Better keep a close eye on that one." "Oh, we do," my father would reply, and there was something in his tone that made adults nod approvingly, never suspecting the true meaning behind his words. Our house reflected our supposed status in the community. It was large and well-maintained, with 5 rooms, modern plumbing, and a telephone, luxuries that many families in rural Virginia couldn't afford in 1963. The yard boasted apple and peach trees, a vegetable garden that was my mother's pride, and that separate storage building in the back that my father claimed was for keeping tools and seasonal items. Neighbors would often comment on how fortunate we were, how blessed our family seemed. And we were blessed in a way, blessed with the terrible gift of being excellent actors, masters of deception, artists of the perfect facade. But facades, no matter how carefully constructed, eventually develop cracks. And through those cracks, the truth has a way of seeping out like water through a breaking dam. The storage room became my classroom for lessons no child should ever learn. It was a space about 10 feet square, lit by a single bare bulb that cast harsh shadows on walls lined with shelves. To anyone else, it looked exactly like what my father claimed. It was a place for storing seasonal decorations, old furniture, and farming tools. But I knew its true purpose. I knew about the chair positioned in the center, about the rope hidden behind the Christmas ornaments, about the heavy blanket my father used to muffle sounds that might carry to neighbors' ears. The lessons began when I was 8, always on days when my mother had somewhere to be. My father had an uncanny ability to create these opportunities. "Janet, darling," Mrs. Peterson called. "She's having trouble with her garden, and you know how she values your advice. Why don't you spend the afternoon helping her?" "But Alfred, I was planning to start dinner early today." "Nonsense. Neighbors help neighbors. Besides, it will give me some quality time with the children." Quality time. The phrase still makes my skin crawl 57 years later. Arthur would usually already be waiting for me when the lessons began. He had developed his own twisted enthusiasm for these sessions, treating them like a game where the rules constantly changed and I always lost. "Virginia," he would say, his voice taking on that sing-song quality that meant trouble. "Dad says it's time for your education." "I don't want to go to the storage room today, Arthur. Can't we just play regular games?" "Oh, but these are much more interesting games. Don't you want to learn what big girls need to know?" My father's teaching methods were methodical, almost clinical. He treated my fear and pain like subjects to be studied, reactions to be cataloged and refined. "Notice how she holds her breath before she cries, Arthur. That's anticipatory fear. Very useful to understand if you want to control someone effectively. What if she tries to run, Dad?" "She won't run." "Will you, Virginia? Because you know what happens to little girls who try to run from their responsibilities." I wouldn't run. I had learned through experience that left marks hidden beneath my clothes, that resistance only prolonged the lessons. Better to endure to disappear inside my own mind, to count ceiling tiles or recite multiplication tables, while my body remained trapped in that chair. Sometimes the lessons were about physical pain, Arthur learning to tie knots, my father explaining pressure points and how much force a child's body could withstand without leaving visible evidence. Other times, they focused on psychological control, the power of shame, the effectiveness of secrets, the way to break a spirit without breaking bones. The beauty of this approach, son, is that she'll never tell anyone. She can't tell anyone. Who would believe her? And even if they did, what child wants to admit to being so cooperative, as if I had choices, as if an 8-year-old girl had any real option when faced with 2 people who outweighed her by 100 pounds each and controlled every aspect of her world. The worst part wasn't the physical pain, though. That was considerable. The worst part was the way they made me complicit in my own abuse, the way they framed my survival responses as willing participation. When you're a child and the most important adults in your world tell you that your pain is your fault, you begin to believe them. I developed coping mechanisms that would serve me well later in life, though I didn't recognize them as such at the time. I learned to observe human behavior with scientific detachment, to read micro-expressions and vocal tones, to predict violent outbursts before they occurred. I learned to compartmentalize trauma, storing it in mental boxes that I could close when I needed to function. Most importantly, I learned that adults were not automatically trustworthy, that families could be prisons, and that sometimes the only person you could count on for protection was yourself. These were harsh lessons for a child, but they were also the foundation for everything I would become. Every skill I developed in that storage room, reading people, understanding psychological manipulation, recognizing the patterns of abuse, would later be turned into weapons against the very system that created me. But I wouldn't understand that for many years. At 8, all I understood was fear, pain, and the terrible certainty that this was simply what it meant to be Virginia Smith, the youngest member of Leesburg's most respectable family. The first crack in our family's perfect facade appeared on a Thursday in March 1965, when I was 10 years old. My mother had been asked to help with the church's Easter preparations, a task that usually kept her occupied for the entire afternoon. It should have been another routine lesson day, but something went wrong with the church's planning, and my mother returned home 3 hours early. I heard her car in the driveway and felt my stomach drop. Arthur and I were in the storage room, and my father was explaining something about pressure points on the human neck when the sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. "Alfred, Virginia, Arthur, I'm home." For the first time in my life, I saw genuine panic in my father's eyes. He moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, untying me and straightening his clothes, while hissing instructions at Arthur. "Get her cleaned up. Make sure there are no marks showing. If she asks anything, Virginia fell while playing in here. Do you understand me?" But as Arthur frantically tried to help me dress, my mother's footsteps were already approaching the storage room. She had heard something, a sound that didn't belong perhaps, or simply felt that peculiar maternal instinct that warns of danger. "Alfred, what are you all doing out here?" The door opened just as my father was positioning himself casually against a shelf, trying to look like he had been doing nothing more sinister than organizing Christmas decorations in March. "Oh, hello, dear. I was showing the children how to properly store the seasonal items." But my mother's eyes weren't on my father. They were on me, on my tear-streaked face, my disheveled hair, the way I was trembling despite the warm spring air. Her gaze moved to Arthur, whose shirt was buttoned wrong and whose face carried that flush of excitement that always followed our lessons. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, nobody spoke. My mother looked at me, really looked at me perhaps for the first time in months. I watched her expression change as she noticed things she had been unconsciously avoiding, the way I flinched when my father approached, the dark circles under my eyes, the careful way I moved, as if my body hurt. "Virginia," she said softly, ignoring my father's attempts to distract her with chatter about storage organization. "Come here, sweetheart." I hesitated, looking at my father for permission. That look, that automatic deferral to his authority, even in my mother's presence, was what finally broke through whatever psychological barriers my mother had constructed around the truth. "Ah, Virginia," she repeated, and this time her voice carried an authority I had never heard before. "Come to Mommy. Right now." I went to her, and when she knelt down to my level, her hands gentle on my shoulders, I saw something in her eyes that I had almost forgotten existed. Love. Real, protective, maternal love. "Alfred," she said, never taking her eyes off me. "Take Arthur into the house, now." "Janet, I don't think you understand what—" "Now, Alfred." There was steel in her voice, a strength I hadn't known she possessed. My father hesitated, clearly calculating whether to assert his dominance or retreat and regroup. In the end, the risk of a scene must have seemed too great because he gestured for Arthur to follow him. "Come on, son. Let's give the ladies some privacy for their conversation." The way he said conversation was meant to be dismissive, but there was something underneath it, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. For the first time in my life, I sensed that my father might not be as all-powerful as I had believed. When we were alone, my mother locked the storage room door, a detail that spoke volumes about her growing understanding of our situation. She sat on the floor across from me, something that Janet I knew would never have done in her good dress. "Virginia, I need you to tell me the truth about what happens in this room." "Nothing, Mama. We were just organizing things like Daddy said." "Sweetheart, look at me." I raised my eyes to meet hers, and what I saw there gave me courage I didn't know I possessed. "I know something has been happening to you. I should have seen it sooner, should have protected you better. But I see it now, and I need you to help me understand so I can make it stop." The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam. 2 years of secret shame and terror spilled onto the dusty floor of that storage room, while my mother held me and wept for my pain, for her blindness, for the time we had lost to willful ignorance and justified fear. When I finished talking, she was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, harder, more determined than I had ever heard it. "Virginia, can you keep a secret, a good secret, not like the bad ones they made you keep?" I nodded. "We're going to leave here. We're going to go somewhere safe where they can never hurt you again. But it has to be our secret until I can figure out how to do it safely. Can you be brave a little longer?" I could be brave. I had been being brave for 2 years. I could be brave a little longer if it meant freedom. What I didn't know was that my mother had already been thinking about escape for months. She had been saving money, making discreet inquiries, and planning for the day when she would find the courage to act on her growing suspicions. My confession didn't just confirm her fears, it crystallized her resolve. And a determined woman, even one who has been beaten down by years of psychological manipulation, can be a force more powerful than any man who relies on fear to maintain control. The war for our freedom was about to begin. What my father and Arthur didn't know, what I didn't know until years later, was that my mother had been living a double life of her own. While they thought they had her completely under their control, she had been quietly building a network of allies and resources that would make our escape possible. It started with Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell, the librarian at Leesburg's small public library. Mrs. Hartwell was a spinster in her 60s, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, who had never married because, as she told anyone who asked, she had never met a man worth giving up her independence for. "My chmois, Janet Smith," she said one day when my mother was returning books, "you look like a woman who needs to have a conversation. My office. Now." Mrs. Hartwell had been watching our family for months, using her librarian's skills of observation and research to piece together information that others missed. She knew that my father's business dealings weren't entirely legitimate. She had noticed patterns in his customers, men who visited the store, after-hours transactions that didn't appear in any ledger, conversations that stopped abruptly when anyone else entered the building. "Your husband is not the man this town thinks he is," she told my mother bluntly. "And I suspect your family situation is not what it appears to be either." It took 3 visits before my mother trusted Mrs. Hartwell enough to tell her the truth. When she finally did, the librarian's response was swift and practical. "I have contacts, people who help women and children in situations like yours. The question is, are you ready to do what it takes to get free?" Through Mrs. Hartwell, my mother learned about an informal network of people, mostly women, who helped families escape domestic violence. It wasn't organized or official. It was simply a collection of individuals who understood that sometimes the law couldn't or wouldn't protect the innocent, and who were willing to take risks to fill that gap. There was Sarah Mills, a seamstress who could alter clothes and hair to change someone's appearance. Thomas Chen, who ran a small printing business and could produce documents that weren't entirely legal but were extremely convincing. Margaret Foster, a nurse who could treat injuries without asking questions or leaving paper trails. And there was Sebastian Mills, Sarah's nephew, who worked in the Vital Records Department in Washington, D.C., and who understood that sometimes people needed to disappear completely in order to survive. The beauty of our system, Mrs. Hartwell explained to my mother, is that it's not really a system at all. We're just individuals who help when we can and who don't ask questions we don't need answered. While I thought my mother was planning a simple escape, she was actually orchestrating something far more complex, a complete erasure of our old identities and the creation of new ones. She had been preparing for months, saving money in small amounts that wouldn't be noticed, gathering important documents, and studying the routines and patterns that would give us the best chance of success. But the most crucial element of her plan wasn't the logistics of leaving it, was ensuring that my father and Arthur would never be able to find us. And for that, she needed information that could destroy them if they tried to pursue us. This is where Mrs. Hartwell's research skills proved invaluable. Through patient investigation, she had discovered that my father's legitimate business was just a front for several illegal activities. He was loaning money at usurious rates, taking land from farmers who couldn't repay him, and most damning of all, he was connected to a network of men who shared certain unsavory interests in children. Your husband isn't just a danger to you and Virginia, Mrs. Hartwell told my mother during one of their clandestine meetings. He's part of something much larger and more dangerous. But that also gives us leverage. The leverage came in the form of documented evidence photographs, financial records, and testimony from other victims that could send my father to prison for a very long time. Mrs. Hartwell had been gathering this evidence, not just to help us, but to protect other children in the community. When you leave, she explained, you're going to leave him a message. He can spend his energy looking for you, or he can spend it covering his tracks and protecting himself from the evidence I've collected. I guarantee he'll choose self-preservation. This revelation changed everything about our escape plan. We weren't just running away, we were executing a strategic strike that would ensure our safety while also protecting other potential victims. As my mother shared more details of the plan with me over the following weeks, I began to understand that we weren't just two desperate women trying to escape a bad situation. We were part of something larger, a network of people who understood that sometimes justice comes not from the official channels, but from ordinary people willing to take extraordinary risks to protect the innocent. The night before our escape, Mrs. Hartwell visited our house under the pretense of discussing a church function. Before she left, she slipped my mother a sealed envelope. Everything you need is in there, she said quietly. When this is over, when you're safe, remember that you're not the first woman I've helped, and you won't be the last. Someday, when you're strong enough, you might want to help the next one. That envelope contained our new identity's contact information for Sebastian in Washington and a letter that my mother would leave for my father, a letter that would make it very clear that pursuing us would be the worst mistake of his life. Our escape wasn't just about running away from danger. It was about joining something bigger than ourselves, something that had been quietly operating in the shadows to protect people like us. And it was about to begin. Friday, May 14th, 1965. The day that would either give us freedom or destroy us completely. My father and Arthur left for Alexandria at 6 a.m, their truck loaded with empty crates and order forms for the monthly supply run. My father was in an unusually good mood, joking with Arthur about the women they might meet at the taverns in the capital. Remember, son, what happens in Alexandria stays in Alexandria? Your mother doesn't need to know about every aspect of our business trips. I understand, Dad. But what about Virginia when we get back? You promised I could try that new technique you showed me. Don't worry. Your little sister will still be here when we return. She's not going anywhere. If only he had known how wrong he was. My mother and I watched from the kitchen window as their truck disappeared down Main Street. We had been awake since 4, going over the plan one final time, checking and rechecking every detail. The margin for error was essentially 0. Remember, Virginia, once we start this, we can't stop. We can't change our minds. Are you absolutely certain you're ready? I was ready. I had been ready since that first night in the closet when I heard my father whispering instructions about how to hurt me more effectively. The plan had 3 phases, each more dangerous than the last. Phase 1 was the staging, making our house look like we had been taken by force. Phase 2 was the theft, getting the money from my father's store and making it look like a robbery gone wrong. Phase 3 was the vanishing, getting to Washington, D.C., and becoming different people before anyone realized we were gone. We started with Phase 1 immediately after my father left. My mother had studied crime scenes through library books, learning how to make our disappearance look realistic. We scattered some furniture, broke a few dishes, and left clear signs of a struggle. Most importantly, we left blood, real blood, from small cuts on our arms in strategic locations that would tell the story of a kidnapping. "It has to look like we fought back," my mother explained as she dripped blood on the kitchen floor. "If it seems too easy, people will get suspicious." The hardest part was leaving personal items behind. I had to abandon my books, my few toys, everything that connected me to the girl I had been. My mother left behind photographs, jewelry, keepsakes from her own childhood, pieces of our past that we could never reclaim. By noon, our house looked like a crime scene. We packed one small bag with essential items and hid it in the woods behind our property. Then we walked into town like nothing had happened, greeting neighbors and maintaining our normal Friday routine. Phase 2 began at 3 o'clock when the streets were quietest. My mother had made a copy of the store key weeks earlier, and we slipped inside through the back entrance while the town was taking its afternoon rest. The store felt different when it was empty, larger, somehow full of shadows and possibility. My mother moved with purpose, heading straight for the hidden safe, where my father kept his real money, not the small bills in the cash register. "Virginia, keep watch at the window. If you see anyone coming, you signal me immediately." The safe was concealed behind a false panel, and my mother opened it with a combination she had discovered months earlier through careful observation of my father's habits. Inside was more money than I had ever imagined, bundles of bills that represented years of illegal lending, land grabbing, and other criminal activities. "All of this came from other people's suffering," my mother said as she transferred the money to our bag. "Using it to save ourselves isn't theft, it's justice." Then we began the most dangerous part of Phase 2, staging the robbery. We had to make it look convincing enough to fool the police, but also leave clues that would point to our supposed kidnapping. My mother broke the front window from the inside, scattered merchandise and overturned displays with the precision of someone who had studied the process thoroughly. That's when everything went wrong. We were so focused on our work that we didn't notice the truck pulling up outside until we heard my father's voice through the broken window. "What the hell happened here?" My blood turned to ice. They weren't supposed to be back until tomorrow morning. Something had gone wrong with their trip, or they had finished their business early, or my father had grown suspicious of our behavior and decided to return unexpectedly. My mother grabbed my hand and pulled me toward the back of the store, but it was too late. The front door opened, and I heard my father's footsteps crunching on broken glass. "Arthur, check the back. Someone's been in here." We were trapped. The back door was blocked by overturned shelving that we had arranged as part of our staging, and Arthur was already moving in that direction. In seconds, they would find us, and our escape would become our death sentence. But my mother had one more card to play: Mrs. Hartwell's envelope. As Arthur's footsteps approached our hiding spot behind the counter, my mother stood up and faced my father with a calmness that was more terrifying than any rage. "Hello, Alfred." The shock on his face was almost comical. He had expected to find burglars, not his supposedly helpless wife, holding a bag full of his illegal money. "Janet, what are you doing here? Where's Virginia?" "I'm right here, Daddy." I stood up beside my mother, no longer the frightened child who had hidden in closets and endured lessons in storage rooms. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of my father. "What is this?" Arthur demanded, appearing from the back of the store. "What are they doing here?" "They're leaving," my mother said simply. "And you're going to let them go." My father laughed, but it was a nervous sound. "Janet, I think you've lost your mind. Put down that money and come home. We'll discuss this privately. No, Alfred, we won't discuss anything ever again. Because I know about your business with Thomas Crawford. I know about the farmland you've stolen through illegal contracts. I know about the men who visit your store after hours, and I know what you do with the children they bring you. The color drained from my father's face. I don't know what you think you know, but I know enough to put you in prison for the rest of your life. I have documents, photographs, testimonies from other victims. If anything happens to Virginia or me, if you try to follow us, if you even think about looking for us, all of that evidence goes to the police and the newspapers. She pulled out Mrs. Hartwell's envelope and threw it at his feet. That's a sample. Just enough to give you an idea of what I have. The rest is in a safe place with people who will use it if necessary. My father picked up the envelope with shaking hands. As he read its contents, his face went from pale to ashen. Arthur tried to look over his shoulder, but my father pushed him away. This is impossible. No one would believe. Try me, Alfred. Spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder waiting for the knock on your door. Or let us disappear and spend your energy covering your tracks instead of hunting us. For several minutes, no one moved. The only sound was my father's labored breathing as he processed the full implications of what my mother had revealed. Finally, he looked up at us with eyes full of hate and something I had never seen there before. Fear. Take the money. Take her. But if you ever try to use that information, if we ever have to use it, it will be because you forced our hand. Leave us alone, Alfred. Forget we ever existed. It's the only way any of us survives this. My mother took my hand and walked toward the front door. Neither my father nor Arthur tried to stop us. As we stepped over the broken glass and into the afternoon sunlight, I heard my father say something to Arthur, but I couldn't make out the words. I never saw either of them again. The bus to Washington, D.C. was half empty when we boarded at 7 that evening. My mother had chosen our seats carefully near the back, away from other passengers, with a clear view of both the entrance and the emergency exit. Old habits from a life of constant vigilance. As Leesburg disappeared into the darkness behind us, I felt something I had never experienced before, the physical sensation of freedom. It was like breathing clean air after years in a smoky room, like stepping into sunlight after living in a cave. What happens now, Mama? Now we become different people. Janet and Virginia Smith died today, honey. Tomorrow we start our new lives. She pulled out documents from Mrs. Hartwell's envelope, birth certificates, social security cards, even school records for our new identities. I was no longer Virginia Smith, the broken daughter of Leesburg's most respected merchant. I was Anne Beatrice Franklin, a 12-year-old girl whose parents had died in a car accident and who was moving to Washington with her aunt to start fresh. My mother became Mary Catherine Franklin, a widow who had come to the capital to work in the growing government bureaucracy. Our story was simple, tragic, and completely unverifiable, perfect for disappearing into the anonymity of a big city. Sebastian Mills met us at Union Station at midnight. He was a small, nervous man in his 30s who spoke in whispers and constantly checked over his shoulder. Mrs. Hartwell sends her regards, he said, shaking my mother's hand briefly. She wanted you to know that your former husband received some visitors this evening. Police officers asking questions about financial irregularities in his business. Seems someone made an anonymous tip. My mother smiled grimly. I hope he's too busy with his own problems to think about us. That was the idea. Come on, I have a place where you can stay while we finalize your documentation. The apartment Sebastian took us to was small and sparsely furnished, but it felt like a palace after the prison we had escaped. That first night, I slept more peacefully than I had in years, knowing that when I woke up, no one would be planning lessons for me in storage rooms. The process of becoming Anne Franklin took 3 weeks. Sebastian was thorough, creating a paper trail that would stand up to casual scrutiny while being careful not to leave any connections to our previous identities. He aged my documents to make them look authentic, created school records that showed I was a good student, but not exceptional enough to attract attention, and even arranged for medical records that would explain any lingering effects from my traumatic childhood. The key to a successful identity change, he explained, is not to make yourselves too perfect. Perfect people attract attention. You want to be forgettable, ordinary, the kind of people that bureaucrats process without really seeing. My mother found work as a file clerk in a government office, a job that required no special skills but provided steady income and good benefits. I enrolled in the local middle school, where I was placed in classes appropriate for Anne Franklin's manufactured academic record. The hardest part of our new life wasn't the practical adjustments, it was learning to trust our safety. For months, we both jumped at unexpected sounds, checked locks multiple times before bed, and avoided any situation where we might be trapped or cornered. Freedom, we discovered, was something we had to learn how to live with. But gradually, we began to believe in our new reality. My mother started smiling again, really smiling, not the careful, controlled expression she had worn in Leesburg. I began to sleep through the night without nightmares. We developed routines and relationships that had nothing to do with fear or survival. Most importantly, I began to understand what I wanted to do with the life I had been given. Watching my mother rebuild herself from the ruins of Janet Smith, seeing her transform from a victim into a survivor, and then into someone who thrived, I realized that healing was possible. Not just surviving, but actually growing stronger from trauma. I wanted to understand how that process worked. I wanted to help other children who were trapped in situations like the one I had escaped. I wanted to be the adult I had needed when I was 8 years old and listening to my father plan my torture. I want to be a doctor, Mama. Specifically, I want to help children who have been hurt the way I was hurt. That's a hard road, sweetheart. You'll have to study for many years, and it will bring up memories you might prefer to forget. I don't want to forget. I want to use those memories to help other children remember that they're not powerless, that they can survive and become something more than what was done to them. My mother hugged me then, and I felt her tears on my hair. Then that's what we'll do. Whatever it takes, we'll make it happen. Anne Franklin was going to become a doctor. But first, she had to finish growing up, and that turned out to be both easier and harder than I had expected. Easier because I was finally safe, finally free to develop interests and relationships that weren't based on fear. Harder because I carried invisible scars that affected how I interacted with the world, especially with men and authority figures. But I was learning something important: trauma doesn't have to define you. It can inform you, strengthen you, and give you purpose, but it doesn't have to control you. I was living proof that children could survive the unthinkable and grow up to change the world. I just didn't know yet how much changing I was going to do. High school in Washington, D.C. was a revelation. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who didn't know my history, who saw me as just another teenager trying to figure out her place in the world. I threw myself into academics with the intensity of someone who understood that education was not just opportunity, it was armor. My guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, called me into her office during my sophomore year. "Anne, your grades are exceptional, but I'm concerned about your social development. You don't participate in extracurricular activities, you don't seem to have close friendships, and your teachers say you're mature beyond your years. Is everything all right at home?" I had practiced this conversation in my head dozens of times. "My aunt works hard to support us, Mrs. Rodriguez. I feel responsible for helping as much as I can, both financially and academically. I want to earn a scholarship to college so I can become a doctor." "That's admirable, but you're still a teenager. You should be having some fun, making friends, going to school dances. Fun is a luxury I can't afford right now, but thank you for your concern." What I couldn't tell Mrs. Rodriguez was that social situations terrified me. I didn't know how to be a normal teenager because I had never been a normal child. The casual cruelty that some kids showed each other reminded me too much of Arthur. The way some male teachers looked at developing girls made my skin crawl. The whole social hierarchy of high school felt like a different version of the power dynamics I had escaped. But there was one teacher who seemed to understand that some students carried heavier burdens than others. Dr. Patricia Williams taught advanced biology, but her real gift was recognizing potential in students who didn't fit the typical mold. "And stay after class for a moment." I approached her desk nervously, wondering if I had done something wrong. "I've been teaching for 23 years, she said, "and I've learned to recognize students who are running from something or towards something. You strike me as someone who's doing both. Want to tell me about it?" Something in her tone, gentle but direct, curious without being invasive, reminded me of Mrs. Hartwell. I found myself telling her about my ambition to become a child psychiatrist, though I carefully edited the personal motivations behind that goal. "My parents died when I was young, and I spent some time in difficult circumstances. I want to help children who are going through trauma who don't have anyone advocating for them." Dr. Williams nodded as if she understood more than I was saying. "Medicine is a demanding field, especially psychiatry. But trauma survivors often make the best healers if they can channel their experiences constructively. Have you thought about what colleges you want to apply to?" That conversation changed everything. Dr. Williams became my unofficial mentor, helping me navigate the college application process, connecting me with scholarship opportunities, and most importantly, treating me like the serious student I was, rather than the typical teenager I wasn't. She also introduced me to other students who were carrying their own heavy loads, kids from broken homes, young people supporting siblings, students who had overcome poverty or abuse to excel academically. For the first time, I found a peer group that understood that education wasn't just about grades. It was about building a different future. "You know what I like about you, Anne," said Marcus, a senior whose mother had died of cancer when he was 14. "You don't pretend that everything's fine. Most people our age act like their biggest problem is what to wear to prom. You get that some of us are fighting different battles." Through Dr. Williams' program for high-achieving students from difficult backgrounds, I met young people who would remain friends for life. We formed a study group that was part academic support and part therapy session, helping each other navigate the challenges of pursuing ambitious goals while dealing with traumatic backgrounds. When acceptance letters arrived during my senior year, I had options I never could have imagined as a terrified 10-year-old in a storage room. Full scholarships to 3 different universities, including Johns Hopkins, which had one of the best pre-med programs in the country. Johns Hopkins, my mother said, reading the letter over my shoulder. "And that's one of the most prestigious schools in America. Are you proud of me, Mama?" "Proud doesn't begin to cover it, sweetheart. I'm amazed by you. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into motivation to help others. That's not just healing, that's transformation." But the night before I left for college, I had a panic attack that reminded me how much work I still had to do on myself. The thought of being away from my mother, of being in a new environment where I would have to interact with male professors and classmates, of possibly having to explain my background to new people, it all suddenly felt overwhelming. "What if I can't do this, Mama? What if I'm not as strong as I think I am?" "And look at me. You survived things that would have destroyed most adults. You've built a new identity from scratch and excelled academically while dealing with trauma that most people can't even imagine. College might be challenging, but it's not going to be harder than what you've already overcome." "But what if people find out about our past? What if someone recognizes us? Then we'll deal with it." "But honey, it's been 7 years. We're not the same people we were in Leesburg. And even if someone did recognize us, we have every right to be proud of what we've built." She was right, of course. As I packed my few belongings and prepared to start the next chapter of my life, I realized that Anne Franklin wasn't just a fictional identity we had created for survival. She had become real through years of living, studying, and growing. She was who I had chosen to become when given the chance to be anyone I wanted to be. The frightened child who had once hidden in closets still existed inside me, but she was no longer in control. Anne Franklin was going to Johns Hopkins University to study medicine, and eventually she was going to change the world for children who needed someone to fight for them. At least that was the plan. I had no idea how many obstacles still lay ahead, or how many times I would have to prove to myself that I was stronger than my worst memories. But I was about to find out. Johns Hopkins University in 1975 was not a welcoming place for women in medicine. Out of 150 students in my pre-med program, only 12 were female, and the professors made it clear that they considered us either novelties or nuisances. "Ladies," announced Dr. Morrison during our first anatomy class, "I want you to understand that medicine is not a career for the faint of heart. Many of you will find the demands too challenging and will switch to more appropriate fields of study. This is natural and nothing to be ashamed of." Sitting in that lecture hall surrounded by young men who had never had to fight for their right to exist, I felt the familiar fire that had carried me through my childhood. They thought I was there by accident, by some affirmative action fluke, by anything except merit and determination. They had no idea who they were dealing with. My study habits, forged in the library of my high school and refined by years of understanding that education was survival, set me apart immediately. While my classmates complained about the workload, I was grateful for the focus it provided. Memorizing anatomical structures, understanding biochemical pathways, mastering diagnostic procedures. These challenges felt manageable compared to the psychological survival skills I had developed as a child. But medical school presented unexpected triggers that I hadn't anticipated. The first time I had to examine a male cadaver, my hands shook so violently that I couldn't hold the scalpel. The first time a male professor corrected my technique by placing his hands over mine, I had a flashback so severe that I had to leave the room. Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the few female faculty members, found me crying in a supply closet after that incident. "Anne, what's going on? Your academic performance is outstanding, but I've noticed you seem to have difficulties with certain practical applications." I couldn't tell her the truth, but I could tell her part of it. "I have some anxiety issues around men, especially in positions of authority. It's related to family trauma from when I was younger." Dr. Chen nodded, as if this wasn't the first time she had encountered this situation. Have you considered therapy? The university has counseling services, and there are therapists in Baltimore who specialize in helping medical students work through personal issues that interfere with their training. That's how I met Dr. Helen Martinez, a psychiatrist who would become crucial to my development both as a doctor and as a human being. Dr. Martinez was a small woman in her 40s with gentle eyes and an unshakable calm that made it safe to tell the truth. It took months before I trusted her enough to reveal my real history. When I finally did telling her about Virginia Smith, about the storage room, about our escape, and identity change, her response was everything I had hoped for and feared it might be. "And you understand that what you survived is extraordinary, not just in its severity, but in your response to it. Most people who experience that level of childhood trauma don't achieve what you've achieved. You've turned your worst experiences into motivation for healing others. That's not just resilience, that's transformation." "But I still have panic attacks. I still can't touch male patients without remembering." Healing isn't about forgetting or becoming unaffected by your past. It's about integrating those experiences in a way that allows you to function and thrive. Your triggers aren't weaknesses, Anne. They're your psyche's way of protecting you from situations that once endangered you. Through therapy, I learned techniques for managing my symptoms without medicating them away. I learned to recognize the difference between past danger and present safety. Most importantly, I learned that my traumatic experiences, properly processed, could become tools for understanding and helping other trauma survivors. By my third year, I was not only managing my triggers, but excelling in all my clinical rotations. My professors began to notice that I had an unusual gift for connecting with difficult patients, especially children who had been abused or neglected. "Franklin," said Dr. Roberts after I had successfully calmed a 7-year-old who had been brought to the emergency room with suspicious injuries, "how did you get her to talk? She hasn't spoken to anyone since she arrived." "I listened to what she wasn't saying, sir. And I let her know that she was safe to tell the truth." What I didn't tell Dr. Roberts was that I recognized the look in that little girl's eyes because I had seen it in mirrors for years. I knew the body language of a child who had learned that adults could be dangerous, that trust was a luxury that could cost you everything. When I spoke to her, I used the voice I had wished someone would use with me when I was her age, calm, patient. non-threatening, and absolutely clear that she was not in trouble for whatever had been done to her. "My name is Anne," I told her, sitting at her eye level in the hospital room. "I'm a doctor, and my job is to help you feel better. Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," she whispered. "That's a beautiful name, Emma. Do you know why you're here? Because I was bad." My heart broke and mended simultaneously. She was speaking the language I had learned at her age, the twisted logic of abuse that makes victims believe they are responsible for their victimization. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not bad. You are not here because you did anything wrong. You are here because some adults didn't take good care of you, and that is never ever a child's fault." It took 2 hours, but Emma told me everything. Her stepfather, her mother's willful blindness, the threats and bribes that had kept her silent. By the time Child Protective Services arrived, I had documented enough information to ensure that Emma would never have to return to that house. That night, I called my mother to tell her about Emma. "Mama, I helped a little girl today who was just like I was, and for the first time, I understood why I survived everything I survived. It was so I could be there for her." "Oh, sweetheart, do you realize what you just said? You found your purpose? You found the reason all of this happened?" She was right. That night, I changed my specialty focus from general pediatrics to child psychiatry. I wanted to be the doctor who specialized in helping children like Emma and like the girl I had once been. The rest of medical school flew by in a blur of rotations exams and practical experience. I graduated summa cum laude, earned a residency at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and began the specialized training that would prepare me to spend my career helping young trauma survivors. But the most important part of my education didn't happen in classrooms or hospitals. It happened in Dr. Martinez's office, where I learned that healing was possible, that trauma could be transformed into wisdom, and that sometimes the people who have survived the worst experiences are the ones best equipped to help others navigate similar challenges. At my medical school graduation, my mother sat in the front row with tears streaming down her face. When they called Dr. Anne Franklin to receive my diploma, she stood up and applauded as if I had just won the Nobel Prize. Later at the reception, she pulled me aside. "Virginia Smith would be so proud of who Anne Franklin became. They're the same person, Mama. Just healed. Just finally free to become who she was always meant to be." As I looked around at my classmates celebrating with their families, I realized that our journey from that storage room in Leesburg to this moment had been more than an escape. It had been a transformation, not just of our circumstances, but of our understanding of what was possible when people refused to accept that trauma had to define their lives. I was Dr. Anne Franklin now, and I had work to do. 25 years after our escape from Leesburg, I was running the most successful child trauma center on the East Coast. The Franklin Institute for Child Psychology had helped over 3,000 children and trained hundreds of therapists in evidence-based approaches to treating childhood trauma. But success, I had learned, doesn't erase the past. It transforms it into something useful. I was in my office one Thursday afternoon reviewing case files and preparing for a consultation with a particularly difficult case when my secretary knocked on the door. "Dr. Franklin, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important and, well, she's been waiting for 3 hours. What's her name?" "Emma Rodriguez. She says you helped her when she was a child." My breath caught. Emma. The 7-year-old with the frightened eyes who had been my first real success as a medical student. She would be 32 now.
"Send her in."
The woman who entered my office was poised, professional, and radiant with the kind of confidence that comes from having faced the worst and survived it. She wore a tailored suit and carried herself with the bearing of someone accustomed to being taken seriously. "Dr. Franklin, I don't know if you remember me, but..." "Emma, of course I remember you. You were one of my first patients back when I was still a medical student." She smiled, and for a moment, I could see the little girl she had been. "I wanted to thank you, not just for helping me that day in the hospital, but for changing the entire trajectory of my life."
"Tell me what you mean."
"After you helped me, I was placed with a wonderful foster family who eventually adopted me. They encouraged my education, supported me through therapy, and helped me understand that what happened to me didn't define my worth or my potential. She paused, reaching into her briefcase. So, I became a lawyer, Dr. Franklin. I specialize in prosecuting child abuse cases. In the last 8 years, I've put 43 abusers in prison and helped reunite dozens of children with safe family members. I felt tears starting to form. Emma, that's extraordinary.
But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I've been investigating a network of child abusers, and during my research, I came across some old files from Virginia, from the 1960s. Files about a man named Alfred Smith. The room seemed to spin. After 25 years of Anne Franklin's life, Virginia Smith was suddenly present again. I think you knew him, didn't you? The records indicate that his wife and daughter disappeared in 1965, presumed dead after what appeared to be a kidnapping connected to a robbery of his store. I couldn't speak. Emma continued gently. Dr. Franklin Alfred Smith was part of a network that abused children for decades. He died in prison in 1982, serving a sentence for financial crimes, but we never got him on the child abuse charges. However, his son Arthur is still alive. My blood went cold. Arthur Smith is currently under investigation for running a similar network here in Philadelphia. We're building a case against him, but we need testimony from survivors. People who can speak to the pattern of abuse, who can help us establish his methods and timeline.
She leaned forward. Dr. Franklin, I know this is presumptuous and I know it might be traumatic, but if you were ever in a position to provide information about the Smith family's activities in the 1960s, it could help us save children who are being hurt right now. I looked at this remarkable woman, this survivor, who had transformed her own trauma into a mission to protect others, and I saw myself reflected in her determination. Emma, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible, but I need you to listen to the whole story before you respond. And for the first time in 25 years, I told someone the complete truth about Virginia Smith and Anne Franklin. About the storage room, about our escape, about our manufactured deaths and reconstructed lives. When I finished, Emma was quiet for a long time. Dr. Franklin, Virginia, you've been helping children heal from trauma for decades, but you've also been in hiding from your own abuser all this time. I've made my peace with that. Anne Franklin has had a good life, a meaningful life. But Virginia Smith deserves justice. And more importantly, the children Arthur is hurting right now deserve for someone to stop him. She was right, of course. After all these years of helping other children find their voices, it was time for me to use mine.
What do you need me to do?
The trial of Arthur Smith lasted 3 months. I testified not as Anne Franklin respected child psychiatrist, but as Virginia Smith survivor of childhood sexual abuse. For the first time in over 30 years, I spoke my original name in public and told the truth about what had happened in that storage room in Leesburg. Arthur, now 58 years old and still carrying that same cold smile I remembered from childhood, was convicted on 17 counts of child sexual abuse and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the verdict was read, Emma walked with me to the courthouse steps. "How do you feel?" she asked.
Free. For the first time in my life, completely free. Anne Franklin was a wonderful life, but she was also a hiding place. Virginia Smith doesn't have to hide anymore.
So, what happens now? Do you go back to being Dr. Franklin? I thought about that.
I think I become someone new, someone who incorporates both identities. Dr. Virginia Franklin, maybe. Someone who acknowledges the past, but isn't defined by it.
That evening I called my mother, who was now 75 and still sharp as a tack, to tell her about the trial. "Mama, it's over. Arthur is in prison. We don't have to be afraid anymore." "Oh, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you. Not just for testifying, but for building a life that made testifying possible. You turned your worst experiences into the foundation for helping thousands of other children." "We did that, Mama. We did it together." "Yes, we did. And now maybe we can just be ourselves, all of ourselves, without shame or fear." 6 months later, I published my memoir, Breaking the Chains: A Survivor's Guide to Healing from Childhood Trauma. It became a bestseller and led to speaking engagements around the world. But more importantly, it opened the door for hundreds of other survivors to tell their stories and seek help. I learned that healing isn't a destination, it's a process. And sometimes the most powerful part of that process is realizing that your survival story can become someone else's roadmap to freedom. Today, at 69 years old, I run a foundation that has helped establish trauma treatment centers in 12 states. I've trained over 1,000 therapists, written 4 books on childhood trauma recovery, and testified before Congress about the need for better protection of vulnerable children. But the work I'm most proud of happens in small moments when a frightened child looks into my eyes and sees someone who understands, someone who survived, someone who proves that terrible things don't have to define your entire life. Every time I help a child find their voice, I honor that 8-year-old girl who hid in a closet listening to her father plan her torture. Every survivor who breaks their silence adds strength to the chorus of voices demanding that society protect its most vulnerable members. We are not broken. We are not damaged goods. We are warriors who have faced the worst humanity can offer and chosen to respond with healing rather than hatred, with protection, rather than revenge with love, rather than the darkness that was forced upon us. This is our story. This is our victory. And this is our promise to every child who is still trapped in their own storage room. You will survive this. You will heal from this. And someday, you will use your survival to help others find their way to freedom.
The chains can be broken. I'm living proof.